She was just a child, wandering barefoot on the edge of the forest, her eyes sunken and her lips blue from cold. Elias Moore saw her from his cabin window, standing near the broken fence, too weak to cry, too tired to run. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. The hunger in her gaze was louder than any words she could have spoken. He opened the door without hesitation. She staggered forward, stumbling on half-frozen feet, and collapsed at his doorstep. Her hands were scraped and swollen. Her dress, if it could still be called that, hung off her thin frame like rags on a scarecrow. There was no doubt. She hadn't eaten in days, maybe longer. Elias knelt beside her, his joints stiff with age, and lifted her into his arms. She was feather-light, not more than 8 or 9 years old. He didn't recognize her face. She wasn't from any of the nearby settlements, but she carried the features of the native tribes that once roamed this valley. Alone, a native child, orphaned and dying. Inside the cabin, he laid her down near the stove, the only source of warmth in the room. She didn't resist. She barely breathed. Elias grabbed the last of his provisions, a slice of cornbread he'd been saving, 3 boiled beans, and a bit of smoked meat wrapped in cloth. He had planned to eat it that night, one final meal before hunger took him in his sleep. But plans didn't matter anymore. He soaked the bread in warm water so she could chew it easier. When she opened her eyes, the light of the fire flickered in them, like it was trying to bring her back from somewhere far away. She didn't speak, but she ate, slowly, desperately. And when it was gone, she looked up at him, not with fear, not with gratitude, but with confusion, like she couldn't understand why a stranger would do such a thing. He gave her his blanket. Then he sat in the chair by the door, holding a cup of warm water between both hands to stop them from shaking. He didn't speak her language, and she didn't seem to speak much at all, but she watched him, eyes wide, as if trying to memorize his face before it disappeared again. Hours passed. The wind howled outside. Elias didn't sleep. He just watched the fire. And the girl. She stirred near dawn, tried to sit up. Pain jolted through her small body, but she clenched her jaw and endured it. There was something in her, steel under the skin, the kind of strength you're not born with, but forged in hardship. She pointed to the door, then to herself, then back to him. It wasn't hard to read. She wanted to leave, to go back. But where? Elias reached for his coat and the spare boots near the wall. They were too big for her, but better than frostbite. He wrapped her feet, tied a piece of rope to keep the boots from falling off, and pulled his old scarf from the hook by the window. As he helped her dress, she flinched, not out of fear, but out of pride. She was used to fending for herself, even at the edge of death. When she finally stood, she swayed like a tree in the wind. He steadied her. She looked up at him again, this time with something new in her eyes. Not gratitude, not yet, but trust. A fragile thread, thin as breath. He opened the door. She stepped out into the snow, her small figure vanishing slowly into the pale light of morning. Elias didn't follow. He didn't ask her name. He didn't wait for thanks. He just closed the door and sat back down in the chair, and started preparing to die. By noon, the girl had vanished into the woods, swallowed by branches and snow. Elias remained by the fire, staring at the spot where she had stood. He felt no regret, no pride, just a strange hollowness, like the cabin had grown bigger in her absence, emptier. He hadn't expected her to survive the walk. She was too weak, but something about her eyes, quiet, calculating, ancient, told him she would. She was the kind who endured, who kept going long after reason said to stop. That night, Elias went to bed without eating. Not because there was no food, he had none anyway, but because he no longer needed a reason. He was ready to fade into the snow and silence, ready to become another ghost in the valley. But fate has a strange way of rewarding those who refuse to ask for reward. 3 days later, there was a knock at the door. Sharp, measured, not the wind, not an animal, a hand. Elias rose slowly, his limbs stiff, his vision blurred from hunger. When he opened the door, he didn't see the girl. Not at first. What he saw were 3 figures, warriors, tall, silent, wrapped in furs and armed with spears carved with symbols Elias didn't recognize. Their eyes were unreadable, and behind them, standing between two of the men, was the same girl, cleaner now, warmer, alive. Her hair had been brushed, her wounds were wrapped. And when she saw Elias, she stepped forward with something held tightly in her hands, a wooden bowl filled with stew, hot, thick, rich with meat and herbs. She extended it toward him without a word. Elias hesitated. He looked at the warriors. They didn't move, didn't speak, only watched. The girl nodded once, firmly, and motioned to the bowl again. Elias took it. The heat of the ceramic burned his palms, but he didn't flinch. Then, without waiting, the girl turned and disappeared back into the trees. The warriors followed. No explanation, no conversation, no promise of return. Just like that. Gone. Inside, Elias sat with the bowl in his lap. The smell was overwhelming. It had been weeks since he'd tasted anything close to a real meal. Every spoonful burned his throat, but he kept eating, slowly, reverently, like a man who hadn't earned this grace and wasn't sure he deserved it. That night, he didn't sleep. He couldn't. Something in him had shifted. He didn't know why they had returned, didn't know how they had found him, didn't know what they expected. But one thing was clear. She had survived, and she had remembered. The next day, they came again, this time with more than food. Blankets, firewood, dried berries, herbs. They left them by his door without knocking. He opened it to find the gifts arranged neatly in a woven basket. A small braid of dried lavender rested on top, a symbol perhaps. Or a message. He didn't touch it at first, just stared, heart pounding, eyes wet. On the third day, she came alone. Elias was chopping what little wood remained when he saw her walking up the path. Not running, not hiding, just walking, confident, familiar, like she belonged there now. She carried nothing, said nothing, just walked up to him and pointed to his axe, then to the logs, then to herself. He nodded. For the next hour she helped him gather and stack firewood. She was strong for her size, and precise. Elias didn't ask where she had learned to split kindling, or how she had found her way back. He didn't need to know. Some stories are better left unspoken. As dusk approached, she made a fire in front of the cabin. With practiced hands, she pulled dried roots from a pouch around her waist and placed them in a pot he hadn't noticed her bring. Soon, the scent of healing herbs filled the air. She handed him a cup. It was bitter, sharp, but it warmed his chest and cleared the fog from his mind. He looked at her, finally daring to speak. "What's your name?" She hesitated. Then softly, with a voice still hoarse from cold and silence, she said, "Taya." He nodded, said nothing more. She stayed until the fire died. Then she left again. No goodbye, no promise, just like before. The visits continued, not every day, and never on a pattern Elias could predict. Sometimes Taya came alone. Sometimes she came with others, older women who watched him carefully, who spoke little, but moved with purpose. They never entered his home. They didn't need to. Everything important happened outside, near the fire, in the open. They brought food, medicine, tools, things he hadn't asked for, things he had never expected to receive again. At first, he tried to return the baskets, leave them untouched, but they would always come back, filled again, thoughtfully prepared. Taya spoke more with each visit, not much, but enough. She would name herbs, point to parts of the forest, mimic animal tracks. She was teaching him, though he hadn't asked to be taught. He was listening, though he hadn't planned to live long enough for it to matter. One evening, as the fire cracked low and the stars blinked into the sky, she reached into her satchel and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. It was carved wood, weathered and smoothed from handling. A figure, a bear. She placed it beside him on the log and didn't explain. He picked it up, felt the weight of it. Simple, strong. The bear's expression was fierce but calm. "For protection," she said. Her voice was quiet but steady. "From cold, from hunger, from forgetting." He looked at her. She didn't smile. She didn't expect thanks. But her eyes held something more powerful than any words. A kind of understanding, a kind of knowing. He nodded. That was enough. Over time, Elias's strength began to return. Not all at once, not in some dramatic surge, but gradually, in the way he stood taller when splitting wood, in the way he no longer coughed when waking, in the way his hands, once clumsy from malnutrition, could again tie knots, carve spoons, build. It wasn't youth, it wasn't magic. It was something deeper, the return of purpose. He began to prepare meals again. Not much. But when he cooked, he left an extra bowl out. At first, it sat untouched. Then one day, it was gone. He didn't see who took it. He didn't need to. Spring crept into the valley like a secret. The snow melted in patches, revealing muddy earth and early green shoots. Birds returned. Streams ran freely. Elias stepped outside one morning to find Taya sitting on the porch, legs crossed, skin warmed by sunlight. She looked younger now, stronger. He joined her in silence. She handed him a handful of wild mint. He crushed it in his fingers, inhaled the scent. Then she asked a question that froze him more than any winter wind had. "Why did you give it to me?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked out over the valley, watched the way the trees swayed in the breeze. "Because you were dying," he said finally. She nodded. "But you were too." He looked down at his hands, at the calluses, the scars, the dirt beneath his nails. Hands that had buried a wife, hands that had grown food, butchered animals, written prayers. Hands that had let go of everything. "I didn't think I'd make it through that night," he admitted. "But you gave it anyway." He didn't reply. Not because he didn't have words, but because no words felt necessary. She understood. That was enough. That day she stayed longer than usual. They worked side by side, mending a broken fence, patching the roof with bark and pine tar. He taught her how to sharpen a blade using river stone. She showed him how to trace rabbit tracks through thawed mud. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, a new figure appeared at the edge of the woods. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, with deep-set eyes and a face carved from age and authority. He wore a medallion Elias didn't recognize. When Taya saw him, she rose quickly and bowed her head. Elias stood too, unsure of what to do. The man spoke softly in their language. Taya responded. Their exchange was brief but intense. Then she turned back to Elias. "He is my uncle," she said. "My mother's brother." "Leader now." Elias nodded. The man stepped forward, studied him. His eyes held no malice, just weight. Then he placed something at Elias's feet, a wrapped bundle. Inside was dried meat, a finely made blanket, and a carved pendant of antler. "He says thank you," Taya explained. Elias looked down. "Tell him I didn't do it for thanks." She translated. The man didn't respond, just gave a small bow, turned, and vanished back into the trees. As darkness settled over the cabin once more, Elias placed the pendant beside the wooden bear. 2 symbols now, both freely given, both carrying more meaning than he could understand. He stared at them long into the night, wondering how a single act, one meal, given without expectation, had echoed so far. The next time Elias saw Taya, she wasn't alone. A group of riders appeared at the edge of the valley, moving slowly, cautiously. There were 4 of them, 2 men, 1 woman, and a boy no older than 10, all dressed in tribal garb, their faces marked with soot and symbol. Elias stepped outside his cabin and waited, his hands empty, his posture calm. Taya rode at the front. She dismounted and approached him with quiet resolve. Her voice was firmer now, her words clearer. "They want to see who you are." Elias didn't flinch. He simply nodded and stepped aside, allowing them space around his fire. The visitors didn't speak immediately. They studied him, his home, his tools. They took in every detail with eyes that had learned to trust only what was earned. When the silence stretched long, Elias broke it the only way he knew how. He offered them food. It was modest. Just roasted root vegetables and a bit of dried venison Taya had left days before. He didn't cook for praise. He cooked because it was what one did when someone came to your home with peace in their eyes. The woman accepted the bowl first, then the boy, then the others. No one said a word. But something changed in the air as they ate. Shoulders relaxed, eyes softened. Hunger humbles even the most guarded hearts. Later, as the sky turned gold with late spring sun, the elder of the men spoke. His voice was low and measured, and Taya translated each word with care. You gave your last meal to a stranger, a child, one not of your blood. You had no reason, no hope of return, yet you gave. Elias said nothing. The man continued. Most take, even from those with nothing left. But you gave. Taya paused, then added, He wants to know why. Elias stared into the fire for a long time before answering. Because someone once gave to me, he said quietly. A man I never saw again. When I was young, my father had died. My mother was sick. A traveler gave us food. He didn't ask for anything, just left it at our door and walked on. We survived that winter because of him. I never forgot. The group grew still. Even the boys stopped fidgeting. It stays with you, Elias added. When someone gives like that, it never leaves you. The elder nodded once, then stood. From a satchel, he pulled a long cloth bundle, carefully tied. Taya stepped forward and accepted it on his behalf. She turned and presented it to Elias. He untied it slowly, revealing a knife. Not a weapon, but a tool. The handle was carved from bone, smooth as riverstone, with intricate markings along the hilt. For your hands, Taya said, to keep building, keep surviving. Elias turned the knife over in his palm. It was perfectly balanced, ancient, but cared for. It had belonged to someone important. He looked up, about to speak, but Taya raised her hand. They know what you'll say. You don't want gifts. You don't want glory. That's why they gave it. The visitors left before sundown, quietly. No ceremony, no farewell, just a silent understanding between people who had nothing, and yet shared everything. That night, Elias sat by the fire holding the knife. He thought of Miriam, of the child they had never had, of the stranger who had once saved him, of the choice he had made without thinking, when he opened his door to a girl with frostbitten fingers and eyes full of silence. He had never expected to see her again. He had never asked for anything in return. And yet, the valley had changed. In the weeks that followed, paths once hidden began to appear. Trails he'd never dared to explore were now worn with footsteps. He would find small signs, stones stacked in patterns, feathers tied to branches, carved messages left near his fence. He didn't know their full meaning, but he felt their intention. Taya still came. Not as often now, but when she did, she brought stories of her people, of their rituals, of the healing they offered the land, and the losses they carried in silence. She spoke of storms, of soldiers, of years spent running and hiding, and Elias listened, not as a settler, not as a witness, but as someone who had lived his own kind of exile. One morning she arrived with urgency in her voice. They're coming, she said. From the south, soldiers, looking for someone, asking about me. Elias tensed. What did you tell them? Nothing, she said. But they're asking questions in the towns. They'll come this way. He didn't hesitate. You'll stay here. Taya shook her head. If they find me here, they'll accuse you too. They'll say you're helping. He looked her in the eye. I am. She went quiet. Outside the wind shifted. The trees bent slightly, like they too were listening. That night, they built a second fire, further into the woods. A place to hide if soldiers came. A place where Taya could vanish again if she had to. As they worked, she asked him something she never had before. Do you regret it? He didn't need to ask what she meant. No, he said. Not even a little. They came at dawn. Elias had just stepped outside when the hooves began to echo through the valley. 6 riders in military blue, rifles strapped to their backs, expressions hard with suspicion. They didn't shout, they didn't threaten, but their presence felt like frost on bone, cold, inevitable. The lead officer dismounted and approached. His boots crunched over the thawing earth, stopping only a few feet from Elias. We've heard there's been activity up here, he said, voice clipped. People moving through the valley, natives. You seen anything? Elias didn't blink. I've seen deer, elk, a fox 2 nights ago. The officer narrowed his eyes. No signs of camps, strangers, children. Elias let the pause hang, then said flatly, nothing that doesn't belong. Another soldier walked past the cabin, glancing toward the tree line. Taya was out there now, crouched low in the second fire pit they had prepared. covered in mud and pine, still as stone. Elias prayed she would not move. The officer glanced toward the cabin. "Mind if we take a look inside?" Elias nodded once. "Be my guest." They entered, rifles in hand, eyes scanning every corner. The room was simple: bed, firewood, table, carving tools. Nothing suspicious, nothing to hold attention. But the pendant. It lay on the mantel beside the wooden bear. Its carvings unmistakable, tribal, sacred. Elias saw the moment the soldier's gaze landed on it. "What's this?" the man asked. "A gift," Elias said. "From who?" He shrugged. "Someone passing through. Left it in exchange for help." "Help?" "Food, shelter, one night." The officer stepped closer. "That's not just a trinket. It's ceremonial. High rank. Could mean you're harboring someone important." Elias didn't flinch. Didn't ask their rank. Didn't ask their name. The officer studied him for a long time. "That's a dangerous kind of ignorance, farmer." Elias didn't reply. Outside, the wind picked up. Branches creaked above the cabin. Tension stretched between silence and suspicion. After a moment, the officer turned to his men. "There's nothing here. Let's move on." Reluctantly, they filed out. The lead soldier paused at the door. "If you do see something, or someone, you'd be wise to report it. This land isn't as empty as you think." He mounted his horse and rode off, the others following. Their presence dissolved into the distance, leaving the valley quiet once more. Elias didn't move until the sound was gone. Then he walked to the tree line. Taya emerged slowly. Dirt streaked across her face, trembling not from fear, but from exhaustion. He reached out and helped her up, hands steady. "You should go," he said softly. "Tonight. Far. Don't wait for them to circle back." She nodded, but didn't step away. Instead, she reached into her pouch and pulled something small, folded cloth. Inside was a pendant, nearly identical to the one on his mantel, but smaller, more delicate. "For you," she whispered. "I already have one." "This is not for protection," she said. "It's for remembering." He took it, held it carefully, as if it might dissolve in his hands. Taya stepped back. "You won't see me again." Elias nodded. "I know." A long pause stretched between them. Wind stirred the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called. "I told them you were a ghost," she said, half smiling. "A spirit who wandered the edge of the world, giving without taking." He let out a breath, almost a laugh. "And what did they say?" "They believed me." That night, Elias sat by the fire, the smaller pendant clutched in one hand. He didn't cry. He didn't smile. He simply let the silence surround him like it always had. But this time, it didn't feel empty. The next morning, he rose with the sun. He chopped wood, mended the fence. He cleaned the tools, sharpened the blade Taya's people had given him. He worked not because he had to, but because he could. That spring, wildflowers bloomed along the path leading to the forest. Elias noticed that someone had arranged them, small bundles of color tied with twine, and left at the base of the trees. He didn't touch them. He didn't ask questions. He simply nodded in passing. The valley had changed, not because of war, not because of conquest, but because one person chose kindness without witness, and another chose to remember. Years passed. The cabin aged as Elias did. The roof sagged in places, and moss crept between the wood slats, softening the lines of the man-made into something that belonged to the valley. No more soldiers came, no more strangers, just seasons, circling through snowfall and thaw, bloom and burn. He walked slower now, but he still walked, still gathered wood, still mended the fence with careful hands, still boiled water each morning, still sat by the fire each night. He didn't speak much, but there was a rhythm to his days that asked for no audience. Each spring, the flowers returned, always in the same spot, always wrapped in twine. Some years lavender, others wild sunflowers or mountain poppy. Never the same, never forgotten. He never touched them, only paused, quietly, beside the bundles, and moved on. Once, after the third or fourth year, he found a small pouch beside the flowers. Inside was a strip of leather with a stone bead strung through it, smooth, polished, the color of river ice. He held it to the light, saw the etching carved into the stone. A bear. That night he placed it beside the wooden one on the mantel. The space was filling. Years later, a boy came, young, barefoot, eyes wide and unblinking. He approached the cabin with hesitation but not fear. Elias met him at the door, not surprised, not smiling, just waiting. The boy held out a folded cloth. Inside was dried meat, berries, a carving, this one of a bird, wings stretched as if mid-flight. He placed it on Elias's palm and said, in halting English, "From her," then turned and ran before Elias could ask more. He watched him go, the dust rising behind his heels. The forest swallowed the child, same way it once had a girl years ago. But Elias didn't follow. He never followed. He sat down by the fire, turned the bird slowly in his hand, and added it to the mantle. Years later, the path grew over. The forest took back what it once held. The fence finally fell. The cabin walls sagged into silence. And still, the offerings came. Sometimes only feathers. Sometimes small woven dolls made of straw and grass. Once, a piece of cloth dyed the deep blue of river shadows, stitched with tiny golden suns. No footsteps ever preceded them. No voices. Only presence. Eventually, Elias's body failed him. Quietly. Without violence. Without pain. He passed in the same chair where he had once sat, hungry, alone, waiting for death. Only this time, he was not waiting. He was remembering. They found him weeks later. Locals who had heard tales of an old man who lived alone, who never came to town, who traded nothing, asked for nothing, needed no one. They buried him beneath a maple tree, near the spot where the wildflowers grew. The mantle was left untouched. Who would understand what it meant? But someone did. That spring, after the thaw, a group came through the woods, women and men, a few children. They moved quietly, respectfully. One of them opened the cabin door and stepped inside. She was older now, her face mapped by time, but her hands were still strong, her eyes still sharp. She looked around in silence, touched the back of the chair, then walked to the mantel. She didn't cry. She only added one last thing. A single braid of her own hair, tied with a thin strand of leather, laid gently across the wooden bear. Then she lit a small fire outside the cabin, and the others joined her. They ate in silence. Not a feast, not a ritual, just shared food, shared warmth, just presence. When they left, they didn't close the cabin door. They left it open, facing east, where the morning light would touch the wood, and the wind could pass freely through. And the next season, the flowers returned. No name carved in stone, no tales told loud, just a memory, passed in whispers, of a man who had nothing, gave everything, and vanished quietly into the valley, never asking to be remembered. And yet, he was. The cabin became something else after Elias was gone. Not a shrine, not a monument, but a place people walked to with quiet feet and full hearts. The door, left open, aged with time, but never fell. Someone repaired the roof one summer. No one said who. One morning, a window had fresh glass in it. Another season, the steps had been mended. No ceremony, no ownership, only care. Children were brought there now, not to be told a story, but to feel one. They would sit on the wooden steps and run their fingers over the carvings left in the railing. Someone had etched tiny marks over the years, animals, stars, symbols only a few could translate. None defaced, all respected. Taya came back every spring, not always alone, sometimes with her own children, sometimes with no one, but always with something to leave. The offerings changed. Once it was a flute carved from cedar, another time, a stone etched with the shape of wind. They never disappeared. They stayed where they were placed, slowly becoming part of the house. One year the mantel had no more room, so they began placing them on the beams, the windowsills, the floorboards, still orderly, still sacred. Years later, one of Taya's sons grew old enough to ask, "Why do we leave these things?" She didn't answer with a story. She pointed to the hill behind the cabin, where the maple tree stood wide and strong. The boy walked to it and stood quietly. He didn't see a grave, no marker, just a ring of wildflowers, blooming a little brighter than the ones nearby. He stood there for a long time, and when he came back, he brought a braid of his own hair and laid it on the mantel without being told. That was how it continued. There were no songs about the farmer, no poems passed around fires, just a trail through the woods, walked by those who understood that memory does not always need to be spoken. Decades later, a traveler came through the valley, not from the tribe, not from the settlements, a stranger with worn boots and a notebook in his pack. He had heard something in a trading post, fragments of a tale, pieces of a truth too quiet to be called legend. He found the cabin. He stepped inside and saw the carvings, the offerings, the stillness. And in the corner he saw the chair, old, faded, empty. He stayed one night, cooked his own food, left a smooth riverstone on the windowsill. Then he left before sunrise, saying nothing to anyone. But months later, someone found his notebook, forgotten at the edge of a spring. Inside was a single page that mattered, a drawing of the cabin, the mantel filled with carvings, a man seated by the fire, wrapped in shadows and memory, and beneath the drawing, 6 words. He gave, and he asked nothing. The notebook was never returned. It stayed in the cabin, tucked beneath a loose board, read sometimes by young hands, learning how much one life could weigh in silence. No plaque was ever nailed to the door, no date, no name. But the path stayed worn. The flowers kept blooming. And somewhere far from the valley, where the wind carried no memory of snow or smoke, a child told another child a story. Not a bedtime story, not a myth, just the shape of a man and a meal, and the way one choice can echo through time long after the hand that made it has returned to the soil.